If the body of Jesus was never publicly produced, what actually happened to it? Was it stolen? Was the tomb mistaken? Did he somehow survive the crucifixion? Or are we dealing with one of the most controversial events in human history? For nearly 2,000 years, this single question has stood at the center of Christianity. Because everything hinges on one claim: the tomb was empty. Today, we are going to examine, carefully, historically, and without sensationalism, what might have happened to the body of Jesus of Nazareth. But be warned, some explanations seem convincing at first glance until you look closer. Let's go back to Jerusalem, around the year 30 or 33 AD. Jesus has just been executed under Roman authority. Crucifixion was not a symbolic punishment. It was a calculated method of execution designed to guarantee death. Roman soldiers were trained professionals. Failure to carry out an execution could result in severe punishment. According to the historical sources, Jesus was scourged, forced to carry his cross, and nailed to it. Crucifixion typically led to death through a combination of blood loss, traumatic shock, and gradual asphyxiation. The Gospel accounts mention that a Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side with a spear, and blood and water flowed out. Modern medical analysis suggests this detail is consistent with a buildup of fluid around the heart or lungs. After his death, his body was requested by Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the Jewish council. He placed Jesus in a newly carved tomb. A heavy stone was rolled in front of the entrance. According to the narrative, Roman guards were posted. Then, on the third day, the tomb was found empty. This is where history meets mystery. Let's begin with the most common alternative explanation. Theory 1. The disciples stole the body. This theory is actually very ancient. Even the Gospel of Matthew mentions that rumors circulated, claiming the disciples stole the body while the guards slept. At first glance, it sounds plausible. If Jesus' followers wanted to preserve his movement, staging a resurrection could have strengthened their cause. But let's examine the circumstances. After the crucifixion, the disciples were not bold revolutionaries. They were frightened and scattered. They did not appear to expect a resurrection within 3 days. Would this same group, suddenly and without preparation, risk stealing a body under Roman guard? And even more importantly, would they then willingly suffer persecution, imprisonment, torture, and execution for something they knew was a lie? History records that many early Christian leaders faced severe persecution. It is difficult to argue that they all knowingly maintained a deliberate deception under threat of death. Now, someone might argue that people can die for a lie if they believe it to be true. That is correct. But it is rare for people to die for something they know they invented. This theory also fails to explain one crucial element: the rapid transformation of the disciples from despair to public proclamation. Let's move to the next possibility. Theory 2. The wrong tomb. Another proposal suggests that the women who went to the tomb early Sunday morning simply went to the wrong location. The tomb they found empty may not have been the correct burial site. However, this explanation encounters a serious obstacle. The early Christian proclamation began in Jerusalem, the same city where Jesus was buried. If authorities knew the actual location of the body, they could have ended the movement immediately. The resurrection message spread in the very place where it could have been most easily refuted. If the tomb had been mistaken, the error could have been corrected quickly. Next theory. Theory 3. Jesus did not actually die. This idea, often called the swoon theory, proposes that Jesus did not truly die on the cross. Instead, he lost consciousness, was taken down prematurely, and later revived in the tomb. On the surface, it avoids the supernatural. But historically and medically, it raises major problems. Roman executioners were experienced. They were responsible for ensuring death. The spear wound described in the accounts strongly suggests fatal trauma. But even if, against the odds, Jesus somehow survived crucifixion, how would he have rolled away a massive stone from inside the tomb? How would he have overpowered guards in a severely weakened condition? And perhaps most importantly, would a half-dead man, wounded and barely alive, convince his followers that he had conquered death in glory? The resurrection message was not that Jesus survived. It was that he triumphed. Now we approach another frequently proposed explanation. Theory 4. Hallucinations or psychological visions. Some suggest that the disciples experienced grief-induced visions. Trauma can produce powerful psychological phenomena. Perhaps they believed they saw Jesus, but these were subjective experiences. However, hallucinations are typically individual events. They do not occur identically to multiple people across various settings. The resurrection accounts describe appearances to different groups: individuals, small gatherings, larger assemblies. Paul even mentions an appearance to more than 500 people at once. Group hallucinations of identical content are extremely rare and not well supported by psychological research. Furthermore, hallucinations do not remove bodies from tombs. This theory may attempt to explain post-crucifixion appearances, but it does not address the empty tomb. Let's consider another angle. Theory 5. Legendary development. This perspective suggests that the resurrection narrative evolved over time as a symbolic or theological story. Perhaps Jesus' followers began speaking metaphorically about him being alive, and later generations interpreted it literally. But this idea encounters a chronological challenge. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, written around 55 AD, he quotes an early creed stating that Jesus died, was buried, and rose on the third day. Many scholars date this creed to within a few years of the crucifixion. That means belief in the resurrection was not a late legend developing decades later. It appears very early in Christian history. So where does that leave us? Most historians, whether religious or not, agree on several core facts. Jesus was crucified. His followers believed he appeared to them alive afterward. The Christian movement began and spread rapidly based on that conviction. The real question is how to explain those facts. Naturalistic theories attempt to account for them without invoking the supernatural. Supernatural explanations accept the resurrection as a historical event. History as a discipline cannot perform laboratory experiments on the past. It weighs probabilities, coherence, and explanatory power. Here is a detail often overlooked. In the Gospel accounts, women are described as the first witnesses to the empty tomb. In first-century Jewish culture, female testimony was not considered as legally strong as male testimony. If someone were inventing a story to make it more credible in that cultural context, choosing women as primary witnesses would not be the obvious strategy. This unexpected feature suggests authenticity rather than careful fabrication. Now consider the broader impact. Within weeks of the crucifixion, the disciples were publicly proclaiming that Jesus had risen. They did so in Jerusalem, under the authority of those who had executed him. Something happened that transformed fear into boldness. Was it a deliberate conspiracy? A shared psychological experience? Or a genuine encounter they believed was real? Each viewer must evaluate the evidence. But one fact remains undeniable: the empty tomb became the foundation of a movement. That reshaped the Roman Empire and, eventually, global history. If Jesus' body had remained in the grave, Christianity likely would have faded like many other first-century messianic movements. Instead, it expanded rapidly. Now let's step back and ask a deeper question. Why does this matter? Because the resurrection claim is not merely symbolic within Christianity. It is central. If the resurrection did not occur, then the entire structure of Christian theology changes dramatically. The Apostle Paul himself wrote that if Christ has not been raised, the faith is in vain. So we return to the original question. What really happened to the body of Jesus? Was it stolen, mistaken, revived, imagined, or raised? Each theory attempts to solve the puzzle, but each natural explanation must account for three major elements simultaneously: the empty tomb, the post-crucifixion appearances, and the transformation of the disciples. Some explanations address one or two of these points, but struggle with all three together. And here lies the intellectual crossroads. History can analyze evidence, compare probabilities, and eliminate weaker hypotheses. But ultimately, individuals must decide which explanation best fits the available data. Whether one concludes natural or supernatural, the question remains one of the most consequential in human history. Because if the resurrection occurred, then we are not dealing with merely a teacher from the past. We are dealing with a claim that transcends ordinary historical events. And if it did not occur, then we must explain how a defeated group of followers turned despair into a movement that changed the world. The investigation is not merely academic. It is existential. If this exploration has helped you think more deeply about one of history's greatest mysteries, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine controversial questions with clarity, balance, and historical seriousness. Now I want to hear your perspective. Which theory do you find most convincing, and why? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most important question is not simply what happened, but what explanation truly accounts for the evidence.